everyone. Welcome back to Becoming Counsel. Today we're going to talk about an essay example that combines both agency and tort law. So let's get started with the fact pattern. Let's say for decades, the local gardening store sold and delivered large landscaping supplies. Think trees, stones, planters, fountains, things like that, using trucks that it owned and drivers that it employed. Last spring, this gardening center decided to terminate all of its delivery employees. On the same day, it offered each of them a contract titled Independent Contractor Agreement. Under the agreement, each driver would get the following. Number one, they would agree to supply a box truck for delivery. Number two, they would use the truck only to deliver the garden center's merchandise during the garden center's hours and on their delivery schedule. And number three, they would be paid a flat hourly rate based on a 40-hour week with no benefits. The agreement also said the gardening center would not withhold income on Social Security. Now, they also offered each driver a separate lease to rent one of their own trucks. That lease was well below market rate. It also required them to carry liability insurance, but the company would basically reimburse fuel and insurance costs. And essentially, they also said that the lease for that truck would end the instant the delivery contract ended. Now, every former employee signed both agreements and kept driving for the company. Now, 2 months ago, we have a driver, let's call him John, delivered a stone fountain to a longtime customer during business hours. That customer asked John to run a patio heater over to her brother's house, who was 4 blocks away, which was close to John's next stop. The customer offered him a $15 tip, and he agreed, figuring it would only add about 20 minutes to his day, and it would be helping a loyal customer. Breaking no local, no stopping ordinances, John parked his car, essentially double parked his car, outside of the brother's house to unload the heater, and while he was inside, somebody riding a bike swerved to avoid the truck, lost control, and hit a pedestrian on the sidewalk, badly injuring her. Now, discovery later showed that delivery trucks in the city stop in live lanes, essentially double parking, consistently. Survey data showed that it was roughly 80% of urban deliveries. Now, the jurisdiction has no statute making the vehicle's owner liable for delivery drivers' torts based on ownership alone. Now, the injured pedestrian is suing both the gardening company and the driver. And the gardening company essentially is trying to defend on 3 grounds. Number one, John is an independent contractor. Number two, even if he isn't, he wasn't making one of their deliveries when the accident happened. And number three, he himself couldn't be held liable anyways, based on that statute, or based on the lack of a statute. So let's dive into these one at a time. So let's first look at whether or not John was an employee or an independent contractor. So as a rule, employers are vicariously liable for their employees' torts under respondent superior, but generally not for torts of an independent contractor. So this distinction is extremely important in this case. And so the test that you have to go through to determine whether an individual is an employee or an independent contractor, you have to ask yourself basically 3 questions. Number one, is the worker's physical conduct in performing the work subject to the hiring party's control or right to control? Number two, courts will weigh different factors, right? Skill required, who supplies the tools, the duration of the relationship, method of payment, so on and so forth. And then number three, keep in mind that not a single factor decides it, right? The courts will look at it holistically and kind of come up with that decision. So let's apply this here. right? John's conduct was subject to the hiring party's control. He was using their truck, he was going on their hours, he was going on their routes. So it was completely within their control. Additionally, the moment his contract ended, the lease would end. So they had complete control of the supplies. From a skills perspective, driving is, let's just say, a relatively low skill compared to being a surgeon, for example. So that points more and more towards an employee. Now, in terms of duration of a relationship, he's been there a long time, right? He used to be an employee, then he became a contractor. There's no evidence of a big gap in employment with that company. It's also important to know that while he's paid hourly, the delivery is a regular part of the Gardner Center's business. And so, holistically speaking, even though John has the title of independent contractor, he's really treated as an employee. So, in conclusion, despite the independent contractor agreement title, John is almost certainly an employee when it comes to this analysis under the law. So, let's look at the second issue here. Is he acting under the scope of his employment? Because the company has basically said that he was doing a delivery that was not their delivery. So basically, what we have to look there is employees, from a rule perspective, employees act within the scope of their employment when their conduct is either in kind with what he's employed to perform, occurs substantially within the authorized time and space limits, or is motivated, at least in part, by a purpose to serve the employer. So it's important to note that minor detours stay inside the scope of that. And you have to extremely depart from the purpose of your employment to be outside of that realm. So let's apply that logic here. So what was John's conduct, right? He was basically asked by a longtime loyal customer to make a delivery. So potentially he was thinking about, helping out a longtime customer would generate goodwill for the store, essentially a purpose tied to the company. Also, the conduct that caused the harm was exactly what he was employed to do, essentially double parking in order to make a delivery. Now, the deviation was small. It was a few blocks away from his next delivery. It was during business hours. It would take roughly 20 minutes. So this would really fit within the minor detour aspect. And so based on the weight of this evidence here, you could say he was operating within the scope of his employment. And so that second argument from the store most likely fails. And the store is most likely responsible and vicariously liable. So then let's look at the third item they mentioned, that John himself would not be held liable anyways. Well, an actor is negligent per se, even without an excuse, if he violates a statute designed to protect against the type of accident that he caused. And the victim is the class that the statute protects. Now, health and safety statutes and traffic ordinances are generally read to protect the public at large, and courts are generous in finding, for safety purposes. So let's look at this, right? There was no stopping ordinances that were certainly aimed at preventing both congestion and or accidents that happen when cars basically double park. Now, that's exactly what happened, right? The car double parked and then the cyclist tried to swerve around. And the pedestrian is squarely within the potential protected class, right, of being protected. Now, here's the argument, right? 80% of deliveries stop essentially doing double park. Well, that doesn't matter, right? There are precautions that are essentially so imperative that even if they're universally disregarded, they're not going to excuse their omission. So even though you could say trade custom occurs here, the custom does not repeal the safety statute unless a custom itself is safer by course. And there's no evidence here that double parking was safer than not double parking. So as you can see here, John could be found negligent per se, and his violation was the legal and proximate cause of that pedestrian's injuries. That third argument from the company then fails.